I've always been fascinated by the story of how our country came to be, a tale forged in fire, determination, and an unyielding quest for freedom. Imagine, if you will, the smoke of revolution curling over the fields of New England, the echo of muskets firing, and the cries of a people rising against an empire far across the ocean. That's where my story begins, but to truly understand it, we need to travel back even further, to the roots of this land, long before the colonies and their battles. My name's James Carter, a history buff with a penchant for storytelling, and this is the journey I want to take you on. It starts not in London or Boston, but in a tiny village called Ashford, nestled in the English countryside, where the seeds of a new world were first imagined. Back in the 15th century, Europe was buzzing with tales of exotic lands and mysterious peoples. Explorers like John Cabot, think of him as England's answer to Columbus, set sail across icy oceans in search of the unknown. It was a time of maps drawn with quills, curious whispers of Newfoundland and Vinland, and the faint hope of finding riches beyond imagination. But before these voyages, before the English, Spanish, or French planted their flags, this continent was home to countless native communities, each with their own stories etched into the land. I've stood on the rolling hills that overlook the great Mississippi River, imagining the ancient cultures that built towering mounds and vibrant villages, their people living in harmony with the forests and rivers. The Picts of the Southwest, well, in our story, the Pueblos, crafted multi-story homes from sun-baked stone, their women weaving intricate baskets, and their men tending gardens rich with corn and beans. It's a world where every tree, every river, holds a story waiting to be told. Fast forward a few centuries, and England's ambitions grow. The year is 1607, and a group of settlers arrive at Jamestown, Virginia, a place that would become the cradle of what would one day be the United States. These weren't the grandest folks. Many were rough around the edges, desperate for a new start, and eager to carve out a life in the untamed wilderness. I like to picture a lanky chap named Thomas Bennett, wearing boots too big for his feet and a hat that's seen better days, trying to sell tobacco leaves to anyone who'd listen. But the New World wasn't just about tobacco and trade. It was about clash and change. The fur trade that set native tribes against each other, the arrival of Dutch ships along the Hudson River, and the rise and fall of New Netherland, which would later become New York. Imagine the streets of old New Amsterdam, bustling with traders shouting in Dutch, English, and indigenous tongues, the air thick with the scent of spices, sweat, and possibility. Then came the taxes. Oh, the infamous taxes. The Crown's way of squeezing coins from colonists who had no say in Parliament. I can almost hear the grumbling in taverns, where men like my great-great-grandfather, Edward Carter, would mutter, "No taxation without representation, I say. It's like charging me for a pint before I order it." The tension boiled over with incidents like the Boston Massacre, where stones met bullets, and the Boston Tea Party, a cheeky act of rebellion disguised as a fancy dress party, if you count Native American costumes fancy dress. The shot heard round the world came in April 1775, when a midnight ride warned the countryside that the redcoats were coming. I picture Paul Revere galloping down the cobbled streets of Lexington, shouting warnings with his lungs nearly giving out, probably wishing he had invested in better boots. From there, the battle lines were drawn, and the Continental Army, led by none other than General George Washington, a man as stern as he was charismatic, took shape. Our story races through the battles, the betrayals, and the victories, the frost-bitten winters at Valley Forge, the triumphant moment when the British evacuated Boston, and the bold Declaration of Independence penned by Thomas Jefferson, who, rumor has it, could wax poetic about liberty while juggling his quill and a glass of port. The revolution was a messy, complicated dance, but it birthed a nation. Yet the road was far from smooth. The war dragged on, foreign alliances shifted, and new territories beckoned beyond the Mississippi. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the country's size overnight. Imagine doubling your house without warning and finding half of it filled with unknown critters and uncharted rivers. Lewis and Clark's expedition ventured into this vast wilderness, their journals filled with sketches of unfamiliar animals and encounters with indigenous peoples, some friendly, some wary. As the years passed, the country grew, sometimes painfully. The clash between North and South over slavery led to the darkest chapter, the Civil War. I think of the soldiers on both sides, young men like my ancestor Samuel Carter, marching into battle with hope and fear tangled in their hearts. The war tore families apart, but it also paved the way for a new era of freedom. Our tale doesn't end there. From the roaring 20s, with jazz filling the smoky clubs of Chicago, to the horrors and heroism of 2 world wars, to the tension of the Cold War and the race to the moon, this land has been a stage for drama, courage, and change. And yet, even now, as I stand here in modern-day Ashford, looking at a map dotted with stars and stripes, I can't help but wonder, what stories remain untold? What shadows linger beneath the surface of this great nation's history? There's a mystery waiting, a secret that could change everything. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. The first time I set foot in Boston, I was struck by a peculiar mix of elegance and grit. A city where cobblestone streets echoed with the footsteps of revolutionaries, and the salty breeze from the harbor carried whispers of rebellion. It was 1773, and the air was thick with tension, but also with a strange sense of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. I found myself wandering near the docks, watching a crowd gather. Among them was a striking woman named Emily Bradford, whose sharp eyes and fiery spirit made her stand out even in a sea of determined faces. She wore a deep green woolen cloak that hugged her slender frame, the fabric slightly worn but carefully mended, a testament to hard times and hard living. Her boots, sturdy yet stylish, clicked purposefully against the stones, and a simple silver locket hung from her neck, catching the fading light just so. There was something almost magnetic about her, like she knew the fate of the city rested in the hands of people like her. That evening Emily whispered to me about the planned protest, the notorious Boston Tea Party. "We're not just dumping tea," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We're sending a message. They think we're just a bunch of colonists to be taxed into submission, but we're more than that. We're the seed of something new." I watched as men disguised themselves in feathers and face paint, their laughter masking a fierce determination. The British ships were docked, their holds heavy with chests of tea meant to line the pockets of Parliament's cronies. The plan was simple, yet daring. Seize those chests and toss them into the cold harbor waters. As the night deepened, the party moved with a strange mix of solemnity and mischief. Emily, despite her delicate features, wielded a hatchet with surprising confidence, breaking open crates and sending bundles of tea leaves swirling into the dark waves below. The scent of the tea, rich and earthy, mingled with the salty spray, creating a moment both rebellious and strangely poetic. There was a tension beneath the revelry, a silent warning that the Crown would not take this lightly. Sure enough, within days, the streets of Boston filled with red-coated soldiers, their faces stern, their muskets gleaming under the sun. The city felt like a powder keg, and every glance between colonist and soldier was a spark waiting to ignite. Emily and I found ourselves at a secret meeting in a dimly lit tavern, the air thick with smoke and whispered plans. Her eyes flickered with resolve as she laid out the next steps, a call to arms, a plea for unity among the colonies. "We're on the edge of something that will change everything," she said. "But it won't be easy. The crown has power, and they won't hesitate to use it. I couldn't help but admire her courage, though I joked, "Emily, with all this talk of revolution, maybe you should consider a quieter line of work. Ever thought about becoming a florist? At least flowers don't shoot back." She flashed a wry smile, the kind that could melt the coldest night. "And miss all this excitement? Not a chance." As the British tightened their grip, small skirmishes broke out in the countryside. The Minutemen, farmers, blacksmiths, teachers, prepared to defend their homes at a moment's notice. I remember the night Paul Revere rode through the darkness, his warning piercing the quiet with urgency. The phrase, "The British are coming," echoed through the valleys, a call to arms that transformed ordinary men into soldiers. Standing among the anxious crowd at Lexington Green, I caught sight of Emily once more, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, eyes scanning the horizon. When the first shots rang out, chaos erupted, but so did a fierce determination. The revolution had truly begun. And yet, as the smoke settled and the battle lines were drawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a far greater conflict, one that would test every ounce of courage and conviction. Somewhere in the shadows, a darker force was stirring, one that would challenge the very idea of freedom itself. But that secret, that hidden threat, would remain locked away for now, waiting to reveal itself when the time was right. The chill of winter bit deep that year, and Boston wore a blanket of gray, frost clinging to the bare branches, smoke curling from chimneys, and snow crunching beneath the boots of weary soldiers. It was late 1777, and the war had dragged on longer than anyone expected. The countryside was scarred, but so was the spirit of the people. I found myself at Valley Forge, where the Continental Army had taken refuge, a place as harsh as it was hopeful. There, amid the frozen tents and muddy grounds, I met Sarah Whitmore, a nurse with hands as gentle as the winter snow and eyes that held storms of their own. She moved through the camp wrapped in a thick wool cloak, the edges frayed from endless wear, her dark hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress, practical but neatly patched, bore the faint scent of lavender and something stronger, courage. Sarah wasn't just tending to wounds, she was stitching together the broken morale of men who'd seen too much death. I watched her comfort a young soldier whose face was pale beneath the grime, whispering words that felt like lifelines. "You'll see your family again," she promised, her voice steady, though I could tell she fought her own fears. One evening, as the wind howled outside the makeshift infirmary, Sarah shared a story over a flickering candle. "My brother fought at Bunker Hill," she said softly, "and when he came back, he told me, 'If we want this country to live, we have to be tougher than the snow.'" She smiled, a hint of mischief breaking through the weariness. "He was never one for poetry, but here we are." I joked back, "Well, if you ever tire of nursing, you could write a book, How to Patch Up Patriots and Keep 'em Fighting," which earned a rare laugh from her. The days at Valley Forge were a brutal test. Food was scarce, frostbite common, and the men's spirits often as frozen as the ground beneath them. Yet, amid the hardship, a transformation was underway. General Washington, tall and unyielding, moved through the camp like a guardian, his presence a beacon in the gloom. He was a man who bore the weight of a nation on his shoulders, his powdered hair dusted with snow, his eyes sharp and unwavering. One morning, as the sun struggled to pierce the gray sky, Washington called the troops together for a speech. His voice, firm and clear, cut through the cold. "We have endured much, but we endure together. The winter will pass, and with it our trials. Stand fast, for freedom is within our grasp." It was a moment that stirred something fierce in me, a fire that refused to be extinguished. But Valley Forge held more than just the physical trials of war. Rumors swirled of spies and traitors lurking in the shadows. Whispers of betrayal sent chills colder than the winter winds. Among the soldiers, trust was a fragile thing, and paranoia crept in like frostbite. One night I overheard a hushed conversation between two men near the fire. "The Crown has eyes everywhere," one muttered. "If they find Washington compromised, the whole cause could crumble." The other replied grimly, "We must be vigilant. Not all who wear our uniform are loyal." In the midst of battling the British, we faced an enemy within, secrets that threatened to undo everything we fought for. Sarah caught my eye as I returned from that overheard talk, her expression unreadable. "In war, shadows stretch long," she said quietly, "and sometimes the darkest ones come from where you least expect." That night, as snowflakes drifted silently outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous than muskets and cannonballs was lurking in the frozen darkness, something that could shatter the fragile hope we clung to. And somewhere, hidden in the ice and shadows of Valley Forge, a secret waited, one that would change the course of the revolution forever. Spring arrived slowly at Valley Forge, melting the snow and softening the hardened earth beneath our feet. The biting cold gave way to damp mornings, where mist clung to the trees like whispered secrets. The camp was alive with a restless energy, soldiers sharpening their bayonets, horses stomping impatiently, and orders flying like scattered leaves. It was 1778, and the war was far from over. But something had shifted. One crisp morning, I found myself standing near the outskirts of the camp, watching a strange figure approach. He was tall and lean, with sharp features etched by years of hardship, and a gaze that seemed to pierce right through you. His name was Captain Nathaniel Gray, a mysterious officer newly assigned to Washington's inner circle. He wore a dark blue coat, impeccably tailored despite the rough conditions, his boots polished enough to reflect the morning sun. A scar traced a jagged line along his left cheek, hinting at a history darker than most cared to ask about. Nathaniel carried with him an air of quiet authority, but also a shadow, a man who spoke little but whose words carried weight. Rumors swirled about his past. Some said he'd been a spy for the Crown before switching sides. Others whispered that he carried secrets that could topple kings. I was intrigued, and maybe a little wary. That day I was summoned to a council meeting, where Nathaniel was to brief the officers on a new intelligence report. Inside a dimly lit tent, maps were spread across a rough-hewn table, candles flickering as Nathaniel traced routes with a gloved finger. "The British have new plans," he said, voice low and steady. "Their forces will attempt a surprise attack near Monmouth. We must be ready." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like a heavy fog. Washington nodded, his usual calm replaced by a rare flicker of concern. "We'll meet them head-on. Nathaniel, you'll lead the reconnaissance." Later, as the camp buzzed with preparation, I caught a glimpse of Nathaniel speaking with Emily Bradford, the fierce woman from Boston whose spirit still burned bright despite the war's toll. She was dressed in a simple but elegant riding habit, the dark fabric clinging just enough to reveal the curves beneath, her hair tucked beneath a jaunty tricorn hat. There was an unspoken tension between them, something unspoken, charged with history and perhaps regret. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached. "You two seem to share secrets," I teased. "Care to let an old friend in on the mystery?" Emily flashed a sly smile. "Some secrets are safer kept in the shadows," she said, her eyes glinting. "Besides, Nathaniel's past is as tangled as the forests we're about to fight in." As night draped its velvet cloak over the camp, I couldn't help but wonder. Who was Nathaniel Gray, really? And what ghosts did he carry that might tip the scales of this war? The Battle of Monmouth loomed, a clash that would test our resolve and change the course of the revolution. But beneath the thunder of cannon and the clash of steel, the real battle might be one of trust, betrayal, and the secrets hidden deep within the hearts of those we thought we knew. And as the moon rose high, casting long shadows over the camp, a single question haunted me. Could the shadows within our own ranks be darker than the enemy's guns? The dawn broke over the fields of Monmouth with a pale, hesitant light, the kind of morning that feels heavy with promise and dread all at once. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and gunpowder, and the distant rumble of marching feet echoed like thunder rolling across the horizon. I stood among the ranks, heart pounding beneath the rough wool of my coat, trying to steady my nerves as the battle drew near. Emily Bradford was there too, her riding habit dusted with dew, the silver locket she wore glinting faintly against the deep green fabric. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the line of soldiers, but there was a softness beneath the steel, a quiet courage that seemed to light the gloom. She caught my gaze and gave a brief nod, a silent promise that we'd see this through. Captain Nathaniel Gray moved through the ranks like a shadow, his dark coat blending with the morning mist, his scarred cheek set in a grim line. He had the demeanor of a man who had seen too much, yet refused to break. As he passed, I caught a glimpse of something flicker in his eyes, pain maybe, or a secret burning beneath the surface. The battle erupted suddenly, a chaotic symphony of muskets firing, horses neighing, and men shouting orders that were swallowed by the cacophony. The heat of the fight was unlike anything I'd imagined, smoke curling around us like a living thing, the sharp crack of rifles punctuating the cries of the wounded. Amid the chaos, I found myself face to face with a British officer, his uniform immaculate despite the blood and mud. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, time slowed. He raised his pistol, but before the shot rang out, a bullet from somewhere else found its mark, and he crumpled to the ground. The war was merciless, and mercy was a scarce commodity. In the midst of the fray, Nathaniel appeared at my side, his voice low but urgent. "We need to secure the ridge," he ordered. "It's the key to turning this fight." We fought our way through smoke and shattered trees, the ground slippery with mud and blood. At one point I stumbled, and Emily was there, pulling me up with a strength that surprised me. "Not today, James," she said, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "We've got a country to win." The battle raged for hours, and as the sun climbed higher, it became clear we had held the field. But victory came with a heavy price, friends lost, bodies strewn across the grass, and the haunting silence that follows the storm. That night, as the wounded were tended and the camp settled into a tense quiet, Nathaniel sought me out. His usual reserve cracked just enough for a confession. "There's more at stake than this battle," he said, eyes dark. "I carry a secret that could unravel everything we've fought for." Before I could ask more, a distant scream shattered the stillness, a warning that danger was never far, and that the true battle might be yet to come. As I looked toward the flickering shadows beyond the campfires, I realized that in war, the fiercest enemies are not always the ones in uniform. Sometimes they're the secrets we keep, and the betrayals lurking just out of sight. And beneath that moonlit sky, I knew one thing for certain. The story of our revolution was far from over. The weeks following the Battle of Monmouth were a strange blend of uneasy victories and restless nights. The summer sun beat down relentlessly on the encampment near Morristown, New Jersey, turning the dirt paths into choking clouds of dust. Yet, beneath the surface, a different kind of storm was brewing. One of whispers, shadows, and secrets that threatened to unravel all we'd fought for. Emily Bradford had become a fixture in the camp, her presence a steadying force amid the chaos. That afternoon I found her leaning against a weathered oak, the sunlight catching the soft waves of her chestnut hair. She wore a simple but striking dress of deep navy, the fabric hugging her figure just enough to hint at the strength beneath, and a delicate gold chain circled her slender neck. The faintest trace of rose perfume lingered in the air around her, subtle but impossible to ignore. "James," she said, her voice cutting through the heat like a cool breeze, "there's talk. Rumors that someone close to Washington might be leaking information. We have to be careful who we trust." Before I could respond, Captain Nathaniel Gray emerged from the shadows, his coat dusted with dirt, his eyes sharper than ever. He approached with the quiet confidence of a man used to walking the line between danger and duty. "Emily's right," he said, voice low. "I've been tracking unusual movements, messages sent in code, meetings held under cover of darkness. There's a traitor in our midst." The three of us exchanged looks, a silent agreement passing between us. Trust was fragile, and betrayal could come from the most unexpected places. That night, under the cover of darkness, we followed a trail that led to a secluded cabin on the edge of the camp. The air was thick with tension as we crept closer, the muffled voices inside carrying snippets of conversation, plans, names, and threats that chilled me to the bone. Suddenly the door creaked open, and a figure stepped out, a man I recognized instantly. Lieutenant Samuel Hawks, one of Washington's trusted aides. His face was pale, sweat glistening on his brow, and in his hand he clutched a folded letter sealed with the emblem of the British crown. Emily's eyes narrowed. "So, the snake reveals itself." Before we could react, Hawks lunged toward Nathaniel, a hidden dagger flashing in the moonlight. The fight was swift and brutal. Nathaniel's scarred cheek flushed with effort as he wrestled the traitor, finally disarming him and forcing him to the ground. Breathing heavily, Nathaniel looked down at Hawks. "Why betray us?" he demanded. Hawks sneered. "Some of us know the cost of this rebellion, and it isn't worth the bloodshed. England will crush you all, and I intend to be on the winning side." Emily stepped forward, her voice icy. "Then you'll answer for this treason." As dawn broke, Hawks was taken into custody, the camp buzzing with the news. But even with the traitor exposed, the damage ran deep. I caught Nathaniel staring into the distance, haunted. "There are others," he murmured. "We've only scratched the surface." That night, as the camp settled into uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the war was no longer just fought on battlefields. It was a game of shadows, secrets, and survival, and the next move could come from anywhere. And somewhere in the flickering darkness, a new danger was waiting, one that would test our loyalty, our courage, and the very soul of the revolution itself. The air in Morristown was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your pulse quicken. Word had spread about the captured spy, Lieutenant Hawks, but Nathaniel's warning lingered like a shadow across the camp. There were more traitors waiting to strike. Trust was a fragile thing, and paranoia had begun to weave itself into the fabric of our daily lives. I found myself drawn once again to Emily Bradford. She was sitting by the campfire one evening, the flames dancing in her dark eyes, casting a golden glow over her sharp cheekbones. Her midnight blue dress had been swapped for a simpler, earth-toned gown, worn but elegant, clinging just enough to hint at the graceful strength beneath. Around her neck, the silver locket caught the firelight, a small beacon amid the darkness. "James," she said, her voice low and steady, "Nathaniel's been restless these past days. Something's eating at him, and I'm afraid it's more than just the war." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the shadows beyond the camp. "I think he's hiding something." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. Nathaniel Gray was an enigma, a man who seemed to carry the burden of the war on his own broad shoulders, his past wrapped in mystery. That night I found Nathaniel alone near the edge of the camp, the moonlight casting silver outlines around his figure. He looked up as I approached, eyes dark and troubled. "There's something I haven't told you," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Before I joined Washington's cause, I was involved in things I'm not proud of. Things that could destroy us if they came to light." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly the man to keep secrets, Nathaniel. What are you hiding?" He hesitated, then pulled from his coat a folded letter, edges worn and stained. "This was given to me by a man I once trusted, a man who betrayed everything we stand for. It contains names, plans, and, worse, if this falls into the wrong hands, the revolution could be crushed before it truly begins." The fire crackled between us, and for a moment the weight of the war felt almost unbearable. "Why show me this?" I asked. "Because I don't know who else to trust," he said, eyes searching mine. "And because you have a part to play in what comes next." Before I could respond, a sudden noise shattered the quiet, the sharp crack of a musket shot. Chaos erupted as soldiers scrambled, shouting orders. The camp was under attack. Emily appeared beside us, her eyes fierce, her movements swift and sure. "They've found us," she said breathlessly. "We need to move, now." Together we raced through the camp, dodging flashes of gunfire and the cries of startled men. The enemy had struck under cover of darkness, aiming to sow fear and confusion. In the midst of the chaos, I caught a glimpse of a shadow slipping away, a figure cloaked in darkness, vanishing into the woods. Nathaniel cursed under his breath. "They're after the letter." As dawn broke over the bloodied camp, the attack had been repelled, but the danger was far from over. The secret Nathaniel carried threatened to unravel everything, and the enemy was closer than ever. And as I looked into Emily's determined eyes, I knew one thing for certain. The fight for freedom was no longer just against the British. It was against the shadows within, and the secrets that could destroy us all. The morning after the attack dawned cold and gray, the kind of day that feels heavy with the weight of what's been lost and the uncertainty of what lies ahead. The camp was a whirlwind of activity, soldiers tending to wounds, commanders poring over maps, and whispers swirling like autumn leaves caught in a restless wind. The shadow of the night's assault clung to us all, a stark reminder that the enemy was clever, ruthless, and dangerously close. Emily Bradford moved through the camp with purpose, her dark hair pulled back to reveal the sharp line of her jaw and the fierce determination in her eyes. Her dress, now a muted shade of forest green, was practical for the day's duties, but still managed to hint at the strength and grace beneath. Around her wrist, a simple leather bracelet bore the initials J.C., a small, secret reminder of our growing bond. I caught her glance and offered a small, reassuring smile, though the weight in my chest told a different story. Nathaniel Gray was nowhere to be found, and the absence of his dark presence gnawed at me. Rumors circulated that he'd gone in pursuit of the shadowy figure who had slipped away during the attack, chasing down the secret that could either save or doom us. Unable to shake the unease, I decided to follow. I found myself trekking through the dense woods bordering the camp, the towering pines whispering secrets, as the wind tugged at the edges of my coat. The forest floor was a mosaic of fallen leaves and broken branches, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Suddenly, a rustle ahead caught my attention. I froze, heart pounding, as Nathaniel emerged from the shadows, his coat torn and face streaked with grime. His eyes were wild, haunted. "They're closer than we thought," he said, voice grim. "The British have spies embedded deeper in the ranks than anyone suspected, and they're planning something big, something that could break us." Before I could ask more, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A warning shot. Nathaniel grabbed my arm, pulling me into the underbrush, just as a volley of musket fire ripped through the air. We scrambled, dodging bullets and branches, adrenaline sharpening every sense. As we made our way back toward camp, Nathaniel confided in me a secret I wasn't prepared for. The letter I carry, it names not only British sympathizers, but also men within our own command who've been selling us out. People we trust. I swallowed hard, the weight of betrayal settling like a stone in my stomach. The revolution wasn't just a war against an empire, it was a war within ourselves. Back at camp, Emily awaited us, her expression fierce but tinged with worry. "We don't have much time," she said. "If those names get out, the entire cause could collapse. We need to act, and fast." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the encampment, the three of us knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, deception, and impossible choices. And somewhere, hidden in plain sight, a traitor smiled, waiting for the moment to strike the final, deadly blow. The fight for independence had entered its darkest hour. Night had settled over Morristown like a velvet shroud, the camp enveloped in an uneasy silence broken only by the occasional murmur of watchmen and the distant hoot of an owl. The air was thick with anticipation, every shadow seeming to hold a secret, every flicker of light a potential threat. I sat by the dying embers of a campfire, the glow casting long, flickering shadows across my face, when Emily joined me. She was dressed in a deep burgundy cloak that swept the ground, the fabric soft yet heavy with the scent of cedar wood and something faintly intoxicating, something that made my heart race despite the grimness of our situation. Her eyes, usually so fierce and unyielding, held a vulnerability tonight, a flicker of doubt that only made her more human. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Tonight, we make a choice. We expose the traitors, or we bury the truth to save the cause." She paused, her gaze searching mine. "But either way, there's no turning back." Before I could respond, Nathaniel appeared from the darkness, his coat dusted with the frost of the night, his scarred cheek pale in the moonlight. "We have the evidence," he said grimly, "but the men we accuse hold power. Revealing them could rip the army apart." I looked between them, the weight of the moment pressing down like the cold night air. "Then we need a plan that keeps us alive, and the revolution intact." Together we crafted a daring scheme under the cloak of darkness, a secret meeting, a trap to catch the betrayers red-handed. The tension was electric, every whispered word a thread in a web we hoped would ensnare the enemy without destroying us from within. As midnight approached, the camp seemed to hold its breath. Figures moved silently through the shadows, drawn to the hidden rendezvous. The trap was set. Suddenly the quiet shattered. A flurry of voices, the clash of steel, and the harsh glare of lanterns revealing faces twisted with guilt and fear. The traitors were caught, their plans laid bare like a festering wound. But victory came at a cost. In the chaos, a gunshot rang out, and Emily fell. Time seemed to freeze as I rushed to her side, the warmth of her blood seeping through my fingers. Her eyes met mine, fierce even in pain. "James, the fight isn't over," she rasped. "Promise me. You'll see it through." Tears blurred my vision as she slipped away, leaving a silence heavier than any battle cry. The dawn that broke over Morristown was bitter and cold, carrying with it the weight of loss and the fragile hope of a cause still alive. And as I stood over Emily's grave, I knew one thing for certain. The revolution had claimed a hero, but the war for freedom was far from over. Somewhere beyond the horizon, new battles awaited, battles of heart, mind, and nation. And the secrets we unearthed that night would ripple through history, their echoes reaching far beyond the fields of Morristown. But one question haunted me, lingering like a ghost in the early morning mist. Who had fired that fatal shot? The answer was a mystery I was determined to solve. Winter's grip tightened around Morristown, the icy winds howling like restless spirits through the skeletal trees. The camp felt hollow without Emily's fierce presence, a void that no amount of battle cries or marching orders could fill. Her loss had shaken us to the core, and yet the fight for independence pressed on, relentless as the snow falling softly over the frozen ground. I found myself haunted not only by grief but by a burning need for answers. Who had fired the shot that silenced Emily's voice? Was it the hand of a traitor lurking among us, or the cruel randomness of war itself? The question consumed me, driving me deeper into the shadows of the revolution. Nathaniel Gray, once a man of secrets, had become my closest ally. Together we pieced together fragments of whispers, coded letters, and half-truths. The trail led us through a maze of deception, men we trusted, faces we saw daily, hiding loyalties as well as wounds. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Nathaniel and I met in a secluded clearing beneath towering pines. The air was crisp, the scent of pine needles sharp and clean. He handed me a folded parchment, its edges worn and stained. "This," he said gravely, "is a confession, written by a man who could bear the weight no longer." Unfolding the letter, I read the trembling words of Lieutenant Hawks, the spy we had captured months before. He confessed to a conspiracy deeper than we imagined, a network of loyalists willing to sacrifice anything to crush the revolution from within. And, most chillingly, he hinted at the presence of an assassin among our ranks, a shadow meant to silence those who threatened their cause. The revelation was a dagger twisting in my heart. Emily's death was no accident. It was a calculated strike. Determined to honor her final wish, I vowed to unmask the killer and protect the fragile hope we'd fought so hard to build. As dawn broke over the camp, casting pale light on frost-kissed tents and weary faces, I knew the road ahead would be treacherous. The revolution was no longer just a battle for land or freedom. It was a fight against the darkness within, and somewhere, hidden among friends and foes alike, the assassin waited, silent, deadly, and patient. The war for America's soul had only just begun, but I was ready, because some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some debts demand justice. The story continues.